Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am super thrilled you're here today because we are going to completely dismantle some outdated habits you might be bringing to the gym, and we're going to replace them with cutting-edge sports science. If you've ever felt stiff, slow, or suffered from mysterious lower back pain after a heavy lifting session, you are absolutely in the right place. Okay, let's dive into this.
Here is our quick roadmap for today. We're covering 1. The warm-up problem, 2. The ramp protocol, 3. The ultimate mobility drill, 4. Biomechanics and neuroscience, and finally, 5. Putting it into practice.
All right, Section 1, the warm-up problem. Why traditional stretching is failing you.
So picture this. For decades, the standard procedure before a workout or a game has been to jog a couple of laps and do some passive static stretching. Holding a quad or hamstring stretch for 30 seconds. But traditional warm-ups have actually been shown to reduce your power output, your sprint times, and your jump height. You are literally making yourself slower and weaker. Instead, we have the modern solution: active, dynamic, task-specific movements that increase your neural drive and physically bridge the gap between a cold muscle and high-intensity work. Now, what happens when we don't properly mobilize? We get compensatory injuries. I absolutely love this quote from the clinical literature. Treating localized lower back pain without addressing hip or thoracic stiffness is like removing the battery from a smoke detector rather than extinguishing the fire. Think about that for a second. If your ankles, hips, or mid-back are stiff, your body is going to force your lower back, the lumbar spine, to bend and twist to make up for it. And the lower back just isn't designed for that. It's designed for stability.
Let's look at the physical consequence of that stiffness. The literature clearly shows us that when you achieve depth by spinal flexion, basically rounding your back to get lower, you drastically decrease your body's tolerance to compressive loads. You completely lose control of dangerous anterior shear forces. What we actually want is a rigid, neutral spine that's highly resistant to those specific forces.
Moving on to Section 2, the ramp protocol, a scientific framework for neuromuscular readiness. Developed by Dr. Ian Jeffries back in 2006, RAMP is an acronym that walks us chronologically through bridging that gap from a cold, resting state to a primed, high-performance state. First, we raise body temperature, heart rate, and blood flow with low-intensity movement. Second, we activate the key muscle groups we are about to use. Third, we mobilize the joints through their full range of motion. And finally, we potentiate, which really just means ramping up the intensity to prime your central nervous system for maximal effort. For today's explainer, we're going to put a massive spotlight on the middle two steps, the activate and mobilize phase. In practice, these two often overlap. You activate specific muscle groups with intent while simultaneously mobilizing the joints. Sports scientists consistently note that this combined phase is hands down one of the most underused injury prevention tools available to us today. Which brings us to Section 3, the ultimate mobility drill. The sit-to-squatwiththoracicrotation. This drill right here is the star player of the activate and mobilized phase. Let's walk through the physical execution. You start by dropping your hips into a deep, balanced squat. The absolutely crucial point here is to keep your heels completely flat on the floor. You anchor your body by grabbing the bottoms of your toes. Then you release one hand and reach that arm straight up toward the ceiling, creating a sort of half Y shape. You must follow your hand with your gaze to emphasize the rotation in your mid-back. Hold it for a second, bring it back down, and switch sides. Now, the clinical term for what we just did is multi-planar joint dissociation. Don't let the terminology intimidate you. It simply means we are locking the lower body in one plane of movement, a deep squat with max ankle, knee, and hip flexion, while forcing the upper spine to rotate in a completely different plane. Because the lower body and the lumbar spine are completely locked down, any rotational torque you generate must come strictly from the thoracic spine. It is an exceptional motor control challenge for your nervous system.
And why is this specific drill such a game changer? Because it directly combats dynamic lumbar kyphosis, colloquially known in the gym as the butt wink. This is that involuntary rounding of the lower back at the very bottom of a deep squat. As we learned from the smoke detector analogy earlier, this butt wink is almost always a compensation for inadequate ankle or hip mobility. By performing our sit-to-squat drill, we force the mobility lower down in the kinetic chain, which ultimately saves your lower back from rounding under load.
Section 4, Biomechanics and Neuroscience. What's happening under the hood? Now, what's really interesting about this next part is the sheer amount of neuromuscular magic happening behind the scenes. Notice the trunk-tibia angles. The relationship between your torso and your shin bone literally dictates everything. If you lack ankle mobility, you can't push your knees forward, so to keep your balance, you have to lean your torso forward. The literature shows that moving the trunk from an upright position to a forward-leaning position heavily increases the hip flexion moment and drastically increases the muscular demand on your back extensors to stabilize the spine. Our mobility drill actively fixes those angles.
Beyond just the angles, check out the physiological adaptations happening here. On the physical side, moving dynamically through the deep squat reduces joint fluid viscosity, meaning your synovial fluid literally lubricates the joints to reduce friction. On the neuromuscular side, pausing at the bottom of the squat dissipates your stored elastic energy. This forces a deliberate disruption in the stretch-shortening cycle. Without that elastic bounce to help you stand back up, your central nervous system is forced to recruit high-threshold, fast-twitch muscle fibers to initiate the ascent. You are quite literally turning your nervous system on. And then there's this absolutely fascinating physiological fact, the Bohr effect. As the active muscle contractions from the sit-to-squat raise your localized tissue temperature, it shifts the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve to the right. In plain English, warm muscles make your red blood cells drop off oxygen much faster to the muscle mitochondria. This boosts your aerobic energy production and saves those precious anaerobic glycogen stores for the heavy lifting you're about to do.
Finally, Section 5. Putting it into practice. Clinical application rules.
So how do you safely integrate this sports science into your very next session? The golden rule here is that form must take precedence over absolute depth. If you have poor balance or severe mobility restrictions, please do not jump straight into the full drill. The clinical literature recommends systematic aggressions. Start on the floor with shin box switches to isolate hip rotation, without requiring balance. Progress up to a shin box hip thrust to engage your glutes. Then, move to a standing goblet squat rotation using a lightweight as a counterbalance. Only once you truly own those positions should you attempt the full, unloaded deep squat with a thoracic reach. You know, coaches and physical therapists actually use this exact drill as a diagnostic tool, a dynamic screen. When you try this yourself, pay close attention to your body. Do your heels lift off the ground? Well, you likely have restricted ankle dorsiflexion. Do your knees cave inward? Your glutes might not be activating properly. Does your lower back involuntarily round? You're hitting a mobility roadblock in your hips or your mid-back. Listen closely to what the drill is telling you.
Which leaves us with a final provocative question to wrap up our analysis today. Armed with this biomechanical data, will you still fight your body with outdated, passive 30-second stretches? Or are you ready to implement the RAMP protocol, utilize multi-planar joint dissociation, and actually prime your nervous system for peak performance? The choice is ultimately yours, but the science has definitely spoken.
Thank you so much for joining me today. If you found this breakdown of sports science informative and it helped you understand your own movement better, please hit that like button on this explainer right now. Share it with your main training partner so you can both upgrade your warm-ups, and make absolutely sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss our future explainers. Keep moving, keep learning, and I will see you in the next one.